stop maybe from time to time if quite a few questions come up, and then we certainly have time towards the end of the webinar to address any questions that you have. So I know we have a number of people joining us today. We have some students, alumni, prospective students, and then we also have many people who are just kind of new friends of the school. So before I turn this over to Ed Acuna, our faculty presenter today, I want to take a minute to provide you some background on kind of our leadership learning series, as well as a little bit about Lake Forest Graduate School. So we offer these complimentary webinars. We're doing them on an every other month basis. And we really do it as a way to give back to our community, and really, why not? We have such a great resource in our business leader faculty, and our faculty really bring real-world issues into the classroom. They're there to really challenge our students with that practical learning and knowledge, which then really translates into positive business impact for our students. And we are really focused on providing our students with a solid business toolkit. We also focus on leadership and the leadership skills that will really give our students the ability to make a positive impact in their organization, give them more confidence, and allow them to make better business decisions. Also, our students are all working professionals, so they're very busy. Their schedules, as you can imagine, are busy, so we offer flexibility. Whether our students want to upskill with a specific maybe graduate certificate, or they want to complete a full MBA, we have 8 different specialized areas they can do that in. All of our classes are offered either face-to-face, they can take classes online, and then we offer many of our classes through the live video conferencing. So with that, I would like to introduce Ed Acuna, our faculty presenter today, and business leader faculty. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to all of you to take some time out of your day. I really hope to make this interesting and informative and useful for you, and even a little bit fun. So I do encourage you to challenge me, ask some questions. Let's make this as productive as possible. Here at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management, we're very big believers in learn it now and use it immediately. So hopefully some of the things you learn in this seminar are going to help you immediately. My name is Ed Acuna. I'm on the faculty at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management, and like most faculty, like all faculty, we're practitioners of what we teach. I've been very fortunate to have some leadership positions throughout my career, and I've watched some really phenomenal leaders at work. So what we'll be talking about today isn't just the information that's available out there. We stay up to date on articles and research in the industry, but it's about conversations I've had. It's about personal experience I've had in applying these particular attributes and tips that I will be discussing. So let's get started. Lake Forest Graduate School of Management long ago realized that it wasn't enough to create great managers. That's very important, and certainly their programs offer a lot of those tools. But they've really focused on creating leaders, broad thinkers and strong leaders. And to do that, they got together with their faculty and all of these practitioners, and they came up with 5 fundamental attributes that they feel, and I agree, are important for any leader to have. And these are strategic vision. Of course, the leaders are famous for having a vision and inspiring people to move towards that vision, make it a reality. The ability to innovate, to turn change into value, to create solutions that really demonstrate forward thinkingness and solve difficult problems. And then, of course, the agility to respond to market conditions and customer requests and other stakeholder requirements. Of course, self-awareness is fundamental to any leader. You can't do it alone. You have to be part of a group, and being able to understand that group around you and develop them to work together, helping strengths and weaknesses balance each other out is just absolutely core to being a good leader. And of course, none of this would be possible without the ability to engage others. These 5 characteristics, we believe, these attributes are fundamental to any leader. And I'll say they're fundamental whether it's today, 100 years ago, or 200 years from now. What we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at how these attributes play out in the current business and technology environment. But before we do that, you might be asking yourself the question, I certainly ask myself this question whenever I sit in on a seminar or a webinar, and that's, why should I care? I mean, seriously, some of you may be thinking, look, this leadership stuff is nice, but, you know, I'm not a C-level sweet fellow or a department head or even a senior VP. I just have a team. I work in small groups. Is this leadership something I could use? Can this webinar help me today? Well, of course it can, because leadership is about inspiring others. It's about bringing out the best in the people around us and in ourselves in order to accomplish better and bigger things. I think leadership is absolutely vital at every level of the organization. And wherever you are now, as you move up that level, whether you are a CEO now or if you're just starting out, the next level up is going to require you to manage a little less and lead a little more. And the best way to ease that path up that ladder is to demonstrate leadership attributes and qualities before you get the title. Look, it's one thing to be a CEO and walk in somewhere and start getting orders. It's another thing to be somebody without the title and still inspire people to follow you, inspire people to join your vision. So I think leadership is very important at every level, and perhaps it's even more important at the lower levels where you're working hand-to-hand with team members and personalities. So let's get started on that. And I begin with a quote from Kenichi Omai, a very famous management consultant and guru in Japan. And he said, "Rowing harder doesn't help if your boat is headed in the wrong direction." Look, we're all working very hard these days. We have phenomenal tools at our disposal. It may even be that your team or your organization or department are really working in synchronicity and things are going very well. But if you're solving the wrong problem, if you're headed in the wrong direction, all that work doesn't do you any good. So it's important to make sure that we are heading in the right direction, that we have the right kind of vision. Specifically, there's all sorts of new data. If we could take advantage of and leverage the new data that's available to us, if we can understand the customer expectations, the stakeholder expectations, if we can use all of this to really take advantage of the opportunities that are being made available to us to really understand and exceed stakeholder expectations, that's really what leadership is all about. And in today's webinar, I'm going to talk about some of those aspects of leadership in the current world. We call it 21st century leadership. I think the lessons learned from the last century is that things move quickly, and maybe this stuff there'll be different considerations in the second half of the 21st century. But for right now, and probably a decade to come, I think what we're going to discuss today is absolutely vital. But first, let me ask you a question. I call it a poll question, but don't worry, you don't have to type on your screen or anything. But if you could have a leadership superpower, which one would you choose? Would you have a deep understanding of your customers and the stakeholders so that you know exactly what they wanted and what they needed? That's pretty cool, right? I mean, if you know what's going on with the people around you, you have a better opportunity to create value for them. Well, what about the second one, being able to quickly and continuously create better solutions? Wow, that's awesome. Like being quick, being responsive, coming up with something better all the time. I mean, that sounds like the world we live in, right? I mean, it's changing so quickly. So that would be a great superpower to have. Well, what about this last one? Exceed business and social metrics for your community, for your stakeholders, for your employees. Yeah, I mean, let's face it, it's kind of important, right? I mean, we all get judged, and being able to help all of these different constituencies would be awesome. So which one would you choose? Think about it. I'm going to snap my fingers and you get that superpower, so pick a good one. All right. Well, yeah, you guessed it. It was a trick question. Unfortunately, you can't just pick one. You need all three of these things. They're like three legs of a stool, and if you're falling behind on any one of them, well, your leadership could fall behind. Let's start with data analytics. First of all, let me say that I use the term data analytics to talk about data, to talk about understanding and using data. And this term, data analytics, the way I use it, encompasses many things. For example, traditional data analytics talks about collecting information about your marketplace, about your processes, and using that information to develop insights and understandings that will help you make things better. That's great. That's data analytics. A lot of people use the term predictive analytics. And this talks about looking for trends in the data so that you can anticipate, so that you can predict, so that you can move ahead and be there with the solution when it becomes necessary. That's very powerful. There's also terms like artificial intelligence or AI and machine learning. And basically that's doing the data analytics and the predictive analytics, but doing it in such a way that you can take into account multiple variables at once. That's the world we're living in now, and it's phenomenally powerful. I mean, look, our customer base is more diverse than ever, but the data we have about them and the access to that data is also more diverse. So making use of the information you have is absolutely fundamental. Now, don't get me wrong, data analytics was important 100 years ago. I mean, businesses would gather data as well. The difference was that the data they were gathering back then was 6 months old when they got it, and they didn't exactly have all the detailed and reliable data. But moving forward and continuing to collect this data and using the new technology and tools is fundamental. We're going to talk about this in a moment. But having the idea, understanding the insight isn't enough. You have to turn that insight into value. You have to be a nimble innovation engine. You have to turn your organization into the type of organization that can quickly and continuously respond to threats in the marketplace, that can quickly and continuously understand opportunities and take advantage of them. Innovation is the ability to take change and turn it into value, and it's always been necessary, and it's certainly created some leaders in the world, but I've got to tell you right now that innovation is the minimal price of admission these days. If you are not being an innovative organization, an innovative team, an innovative company, you are facing some very difficult problems, and I'm going to show you some data to back that up. Lastly, I want to talk about diverse perspectives. Look, we live in the real world here at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management, and you're going to get judged in the real world. And you're going to get judged by your customers, by your stakeholders, by your community, by your employees, by your team members. And, that's okay. I think great leaders have always understood this and have always strived to create a great balance between the different constituencies that they serve, that they try and create value for. But now, with the advent of social media, with social activism, you've got to really be very good at this balancing act to make sure that you are considering all the diverse perspectives available to you. Also, diverse perspectives in this particular instance means the ability to unlock the talent that's around you by making use of the diversity that is at your fingertips. So these are the three things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how those 5 leadership attributes play into this, but I believe that these elements are vital for success in a 21st century leadership. Let's begin with a quote by Jeffrey Moore. He's a famous American consultant and author on business. And he says, without big data analytics, companies are blind and deaf and wandering onto the web like a deer on the freeway. Holy mackerel, that's pretty graphic. But I got to say that Jeffrey isn't alone in this view. It's a commonly held perception. As a matter of fact, Forbes magazine in 2018 did a survey where 79% of enterprise executives said that not embracing big data will cause companies to lose competitive positioning and risk extinction. Talk about harsh. But it's true. And I'll tell you, it's not just enterprise executives. I mean, you might say, look, there's 80% of these folks, but they're working on IT, so big data's up their alley. But that's not it. All executives are looking at this. There's a poll by McKinsey that demonstrated that data-driven organizations are 23 times more likely to acquire customers, 6 times as likely to retain customers, and 19 times as likely to be profitable. This translates. It's not just at the company level. At the team level, you're more likely to please your internal customers. You're more likely to be thought of and considered more valuable within the organization, both as a team and as a leader. You're more likely to be able to create value, which in turn will be valuable to you personally and as a team leader, as a department head. So data is absolutely fundamental in order to improve. And I got to point out here that I'm not just talking about big data. 21st century big data is a reality, and of course it's a big part of what I'm talking about. But I've got to say, if you have a team of 4 people, a team of 2 people, data is just as important to you. But you may not be gathering that data in an automated way or through the internet or machine learning or even machine-to-machine communications. You can be gathering that data by asking questions. And I encourage you, actually, no matter where you are in the organization, to ask questions of your customers, of your coworkers, of your suppliers. Asking questions is one of the #1 ways to gather data which leads to insights. And insights is what we're searching for. They're the kind of insights that allow companies, according to an Entrepreneur magazine article in 2019, to be 8 to 10 times more profitable, to reduce costs by 10%. I love this picture. This fellow is taking control, right? Michael Stratton. I think taking control of the data is absolutely fundamental. And again, whether it's asking questions about to your customers or people around you, or if it's about gathering big data, it's that data analytics, the predictive analytics, that's going to help you understand the environment and gather the insights that are necessary. And getting those insights is important because we're talking about all of these benefits to the company, all of these statistics, but why is it that data-driven companies do better? Well, very simply, it's because data analytics provide near real-time insights into the customer and business environment. Think about that. Insights. Insights are things that are not necessarily obvious, but at the core of fundamental core problems, core needs. If you can gather these insights, you can gather that deep understanding of your customer and stakeholders, what they want and what they need. That was one of the superpowers, remember? Now, here's an interesting bit of data. IDC Data Age said that by 2025, just 5 years away, more than a quarter of all data will be created in real time, with 95% of that data being created by the Internet of Things. What does this look like? Well, if you are in the heavy equipment industry, either mining or agriculture, today there is machine-to-machine communications that are getting information out about this heavy equipment so that they can predict failures, predict maintenance requests. Downtime in these industries is extremely expensive, and the ability to use data to understand when a machine may go down, get a team in place, and have the spare parts available is a real boost to the bottom line, phenomenally business impactful. What about the vending machine industry? That's not as high tech, but the idea that you can know whether you need to refill the Snickers bars before you roll out a truck to the location, that could save you a lot of time, a lot of money. Knowing what the customer preferences are at different times of the week or the month or the day, all of that helps you make great business decisions. I'll tell you, one of my companies came into being because Illinois had just deregulated electricity. And my partner and I had the idea that if we could gather data about how mid-sized manufacturing firms were using their electricity, they might be able to use this information in order to negotiate better deals with ComEd or the energy provider in the area. And they did. Just by seeing when there were peaks in power, how the drains went out throughout the day, they were able to understand what they were doing. They were able to visualize what they wanted to do in the future in order to make the most use of their energy and reduce their costs at the same time. So data works because it provides insights. And those insights allow you to understand core problems so that you're solving the right problems, the most vital problems for your stakeholders and your customer base. All right, so what does that mean as a leader? That's all very well and good, but maybe you have an IT department that takes care of that. What does it mean to you? Well, what it means to you is that as a leader, data analytics, the understanding and using of data that's related to your particular function, whether it's a team or a company, data analytics needs to focus on the data that drives business decisions. The data that drives business decisions. Now, that may seem a little obvious, right? We all know that there are key performance indicators that we can link to strategy that we want to keep an eye on. Certainly, we want to know what sales are and our market share and customer retention and all those things. But there's more to business than those key performance indicators. And understanding what other elements of the data that you're collecting are vital to your business is part of that leadership vision. Learning about customers is great, and key performance indicators tend to focus on customers. But in reality, learning about non-customers, people who are actively choosing not to use your product or your service, there's a lot of gold there. Just recently, unfortunately this month, Clay Christensen, a Harvard Business School professor and just a phenomenal luminary in the business world, passed away. Clay was responsible for learning and understanding and communicating the vital importance of disruptive innovation, disruptive technologies. And he proved through research, and it's been confirmed many times since then, that often a disruptive technology will displace an established technology initially through its non-consumers. For example, Kodak Film. Kodak Film was a phenomenally well-managed company. They did things right. They focused on their customers. They asked their customers, what should we do to help you more? And the customers told them, we want better film. We want higher resolution. We want better color fidelity. And Kodak did what their customers told them. Unfortunately, Kodak never asked their non-customers, the people who didn't use film camera because it was inconvenient, kind of expensive to get film developed, or what if they took bad shots? And along came digital cameras. At first, they were really bad in quality, but they solved the need of convenience and inexpensive capturing of memories. And well, we all know the story. Digital cameras are the norm today, and Kodak film no longer exists as the giant that it once did. Think about Uber and their approach to ride sharing and cab companies. Cab companies were missing out on some people who never called a cab, and Uber understood this. Airbnb and hotels, the list goes on and on. The point is that as a leader, if you are collecting data in order to garnish insights, it's important not only to collect the insights that support your activity, it's important to collect insights that challenge your activity. And these come primarily from non-customers. And a true leader is never afraid to look for these because, you know what, if you don't, your competition will. So keep in mind, as we go through data analytics and as you use data, whether it's the data you gathered by asking questions or the data you gathered through tremendously sophisticated Internet and Internet of Things-based systems, keep in mind to collect the right information to drive your business decisions. And if you do so, and if you're open to looking for non-supportive data, you're also going to be able to master that what-if game of anticipation, of hedging your bets. And data analytics, as we see by that bottom reminder of a leadership attribute, is a very, very powerful tool in developing your strategic vision as a leader. Yes, I'm sorry, we have a question here.
Yeah, well, we have a question I think that's pretty pertinent here. Someone wants to know, do you have any tips for how to go about learning more about your non-customers?
Oh, yes. Okay, so again, it depends at the level of the organization that you're at. But the first question to ask yourself is there somebody that is opting out, somebody who believes that my product is either too expensive or not easy enough to use? And one way to sort of identify this early on, and something that Clay Christensen, I think, was very responsible in instigating, is looking at emerging technologies, looking at alternative solutions to your problem. So I have to say, and this is not a plug for Lake Forest, but I think they're phenomenal at looking at their market, not only their customers, but their non-customers. They honestly ask themselves, look, we're a learning institution. We're teaching people about business. We've got a brick-and-mortar building. Who's not taking us up on this offer? And they realized that some people just couldn't make it to the building. So they said, we're going to develop and develop a core competency and strength and a competitive advantage in virtual teaching. And they've done that. And they train all their staff, and they've gone out to industry, and the response has been phenomenal. It's one of the largest growing segments of the Lake Forest student population. So the question is, how do you determine and learn more about your non-customers? Be honest and think about, why isn't somebody using me? Is it cost, is it convenience, or is it some logistical element? And go out and find out and investigate that. Great question. Phenomenal. Let's continue here. I want to talk about turning insight into innovation, because data analytics will provide you with some awesome insights. But ideas are easy. Implementation is hard. How do you actually make something, do something with that insight? To be able to quickly and continuously create better solutions, that's awesome, right? I mean, that's innovation, taking change and making value. But I got to tell you, this is not a secret, and if you do not innovate, if you are not constantly looking to turn those insights into actual better solutions for your customer base and stakeholders, you may just disappear. This statistic is absolutely mind-boggling. In the last 20 years, over half of the S&P 500 companies are no longer around. They've gone out of business, they've been acquired, they've been forced into mergers. Over half of them, I mean, these are S&P 500 companies. These are massive companies, very well-run companies, big companies, but they didn't innovate. The typical lifespan early on for S&P 500 companies was 62 years, and now it's less than 17 years. Innovate or disappear. This is not a secret, folks. This is something that is very well understood in the upper levels of management. As a matter of fact, there was a McKinsey global survey that showed that 84% of global executives agree that without innovation, their growth strategy is going to suffer. And this next statistic is absolutely I don't know, it leaves you speechless. 80% of global executives think that their business models are at risk. 80%. Without innovation, the 80% of executives think that they may not be in business. Even so, innovation performance is dismal. Only 6% of the people surveyed thought that they had good innovation performance. Why is that? What can you do to be more innovative? And again, the innovation is the job of every single person in the organization. It is not somebody shutting up some back room, levitating over a pillow, coming up with inspiration. It's about insights. Insights into your customers, insights into your stakeholders. Insights are the key to innovation, because if you know what the real problem is, you can really solve it. So insights help us understand consumption habits, value expectations. In a nutshell, insights help us understand change. When something changes, we develop a problem, we develop a fear, a new problem arises. If you can keep track of those insights through data analytics, through asking questions, and you can understand change, that is phenomenally powerful, because once you understand change, you don't have to fear it. You can actually embrace it. Look, don't be afraid to be a cat, that you're not going to be a caterpillar anymore. You may be something much, much bigger than that. Don't be afraid of change. Change is what's driving innovation, which is what's driving success, what's driving value creation. Look, we all have changes in our lives, right? I mean, the family, and then at work, holy mackerel, new manager, new owner, new everything, right? But if you take change and you embrace it and you say, that change is really going to be of value to me, then you've taken a very vital step towards innovation. And if you're looking for the insights that can explain that change, then you're really in the lead. I think some of you have heard of this fellow. Steve Jobs says that innovation is the ability to see change as an opportunity, not a threat. That perspective change alone, I can tell you right now, when you hang off from this seminar, if you go back to work and you say, what's changing around me that maybe was scaring me, and does this create a new opportunity? I'll tell you a little story. Years ago, I was a product manager for an electrical component that was used throughout all of North America, and one of our largest customers had a factory in Puerto Rico. I walked into my office in Chicago one day. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I got a phone call from the factory manager down there. And he was irate. I tell you, if he could have come over the phone, I would have feared for my life. He was screaming up a storm. He says, your component is causing me all sorts of nightmares. My factory's going to go down. I'm going to lose millions of dollars. He was, absolutely beside himself. Something had changed, to say the least. And I was scared to death of what that might mean. And I wish I could tell you that I was insightful or a genius or wise back then. That wasn't it. I was surrounded by good mentors and good leaders. And at the time, my fear was very high, but my desire to help this customer was a little bit higher. I told him I'll be right down. I hung up the phone, drove directly to the airport, and got on a plane from Puerto Rico. No luggage, no nothing. I arrived at the site shortly after noon, and he looked at me and said, what are you doing here? And I said, you have a problem, and I'm here to help you fix it. I'll tell you, I don't remember. I was there for a couple of days. I don't remember exactly what we did or what the resolution was. But what I do remember is that manager, after that, trusted me. He trusted that by buying my component, he wasn't just buying a piece of equipment. He was buying my word that I was going to help him out. It turns out, and I didn't realize this till later, that when he was so angry and upset, he wasn't necessarily angry or upset that he couldn't build his product that day. He was angry or upset because he was afraid for himself and his own job that maybe he had made a bad decision, that he was going to get called on the carpet by his bosses. And by me being down there and saying, I'm in it with you, I built trust in that customer that, quite honestly, made us dominate that customer at that location for the next 3 years. Nobody could come in. They would come in with different products, and maybe there was a little thing better about this product or the other. But he said, no, I know that Ed's going to back it up, so I'm sticking with him. I mentor small businesses in addition to teaching at Lake Forest. And I tell small business owners all the time, especially in the service industry, trust is the most important asset you have. People make selections about service providers and small companies based on their trust that you will deliver. And there's nothing better for building that trust, then being there when they need you, then responding to problems, then taking a look at that change that's created the problem, and instead of fearing it or avoiding it, running right towards it to make it better. Again, I'm not a wise guy. I didn't exactly know what I was doing, but subsequently, as I grew as a leader, as I saw this over and over again, I look back at that moment and I say, thank God that I looked at that change and I ran right into it. And ever since then, that's exactly what I do. And I highly recommend it because innovation and the ability to turn change into value is something you can use everywhere. So let's look at innovation specifically as a leader. To turn change into value, you have to make sure that the insights that you've been gathering are used to define the right problem. We're all great at solutions. That's what you do all day long. People come to you with problems, and you come to them with solutions, right? We're all very good at this. But how often do you solve the wrong problem? You solve it, and then something comes back the next day. You didn't get to the core problem. Using your insights as a leader to define the core problem is the beginning of being able to turn change into innovation. And you'll never have perfect certainty, and that means that you have to take risks every once in a while. Something has changed, you have an insight, you think you know what needs to get done, begin, start, take a risk. You may fail, but you can learn from it. You've heard about this, right? Fail fast, learn. Look, I'm not telling you to take a big risk on implementation on a $6 million project that's taken 2 years to develop. Don't take risks there. But you can certainly take risks at the beginning. Testing, probing, prototyping. Take those risks. Even when they don't work out, you learn from them. I hate failing. I hate it more than anything in the world, but I learn from every failure. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you'll say that you probably learned more from the failures than from the successes. So don't go looking for failure, but certainly don't be afraid of risk. And if you're not afraid of risk, and if you are a leader who can inspire the people around you to take those risks with you, so that when they fail, you can say, you know what did you learn? Great, that's of value, let's pick up and try it again. Then your whole organization, your team will be absurdly flexible. You'll be open to changing direction on a dime, knowing that if you change direction and it's not quite right, you can readjust. And through this iterative, course-corrective approach, you're going to hit your target. My favorite analogy for this is, suppose you're sitting there with a rocket, and somebody fires a missile on the other side of the planet, and it's headed your way. Oh, man, it's your job to shoot that missile down. What are you going to do? If you sit there and you try and calculate wind currents and curvature of the Earth and altitude and arc, you're going to miss that missile, or it's going to hit you before you even get your rocket off the ground. You can't wait. What you do and what happens in real life is the moment they launch their missile, you launch yours. And shortly afterwards, you say, where's that missile? Oh, it's a little to the right, so you adjust. And a little bit later, where's that missile now? It's a little to the left, and you adjust. And by continuously course-correcting, regardless of the winds and the curvature and everything else, you will hit that missile. I'm telling you now that your career, your life, your projects at work, many of them follow this same philosophy. If you cannot sit down, plug it into a formula, and solve it ahead of time, if you're not building a bridge or doing some other engineering function that you can do that with, then the best alternative is not to wait until you have more data, but to begin to do the minimum value product, head in the right direction, gauge the environment, look at the data again, course correct, and move forward. These two leadership attributes of innovation and agility all stem from the concept that we can move forward in real time, and it's okay to take risks as long as we learn from those risks. And a true leader is somebody who knows this, who follows this flexible approach, and who inspires the people around him to take those kinds of risks as well, so that they can learn, so that everyone can learn. Okay. Awesome, right? Data analytics, you gather insights. Innovation, you've been able to turn those insights into solutions. Awesome, you're ready to go, right? We're done? Well, not quite. Look, we live in the real world. We're going to get judged. And exceeding business and social metrics for your stakeholders, for everybody involved, that means you got to understand and satisfy all sorts of diverse perspectives. I think all great leaders have always done this. The greatest leader I ever met was a CEO for Quaker Oats in the 50s and 60s, and this fellow cared about his people, he cared about his community, he cared about his shareholders, and he made them a lot of money. But the point is that sometimes when you can share this type of vision with multiple people, it just makes the whole result a lot better. So in the 21st century, you have to do this even better than before. The 1950s and 60s were great, but in the 21st century, this means that because of social media, because of stakeholder activism, you've got to be very, very good at balancing all the different elements from the different perspectives. Here's a person that I think embodies a lot of those great leadership qualities. Jamie Dimon is CEO and chairman of Chase. J.P. Morgan Chase. He also happens to be the chairman of the Business Roundtable. Just recently, a few months ago, they published in the Wall Street Journal a big article that said that they are committed to their customers, employees, suppliers, communities, and shareholders. That's awesome. I mean, that's fantastic. Jamie Dimon and over 180 other CEOs of the biggest companies in the world said, we believe that all of these folks are important, and we need to make sure we understand what all of them need and what's important to them, and do our best to satisfy as many of them as possible. I think this is incredible. And again, good leaders have done this for a long time, but bad leaders have been able to hide behind just taking care of shareholders and with dire consequences. We're running a little short on time, but I got to tell you this story. It's my favorite story. It's the Mr. Matsushita story that shows you the power of these diverse perspectives. Mr. Matsushita lived in Japan in the early 20th century, in the early 1900s. And back then, Japan, everything was made out of wood. You didn't have a house fire, you had a neighborhood fire. So when electricity came in and the ability to light a house at night without an open flame candle, it was a godsend. So every house had electricity. They had a cord hanging from their roof with a socket where you could screw in a light bulb. Awesome. Well, some other people said, well, look, now there's electricity in the house. I could sell them an electronic appliance, right? The catch was you had to unscrew the light bulb to screw in the electronic appliance. So you could have the appliance, but you had to use it in the dark at night. Mr. Matsushita said, I'm going to create a Y adapter so that you can keep your light bulb on and put in the appliance. Genius, right? Common sense. Well, his business didn't do very well. He was trying like crazy to sell this thing, and he wasn't being very successful. And his employees, quite honestly, weren't terribly motivated. They weren't the best of employees. Mr. Matsushita, I'm getting to a point here. Mr. Matsushita's health suffered, and he decided that he was going to go into the mountains, like his doctor suggested, get some of that mountain air. That's the typical medicine in the early 20th century. And he was walking into the monastery with a monk next to him, and he looked over, and there was this swarm of workers on top of this giant monastery roof. It was a wooden roof, and they were hammering their hearts out, and they were carrying these huge beams across, very precarious roof. And Mr. Matsushita was absolutely awestruck. He said, this is amazing. This is incredible. Where do you find these workers? What do you feed them? How do you train them? I need workers like this. What do you pay them? The monk looked at him and smiled, and he says, oh, we could never pay anybody to work that hard. They're doing it for the greater good. They were doing it for their community. They were doing it for their deity. Whatever the reason was, they had a different perspective. They were getting paid, but they were also doing it for these other reasons, and it made them phenomenally productive. Mr. Matsushita said to himself, you know what? He reflected, and he said, I don't want to just make money in my company. I want to do something good. So he wrote 7 tenets of doing good. He wanted to make electronic components and electronic appliances as readily available and as cheap as tap water. He wrote 7 rules, 7 promises to society, and even made up a little song about it. And he went back to his workers, and they read the rules every morning, and they sang the song, and you know what? It worked. They were motivated. They felt like they were part of something larger, like their work really mattered. 75 years later, yours truly, in an ill-fitting uniform, said those 7 credos and sang that company song along with my other Japanese co-workers in Osaka, Japan. And you know what? I believed it too, and it made a real difference. That company became the largest consumer electronics company in the world. They make everything under the sun. One of their best-known brands, and they changed their company name to this in the 1990s, was Panasonic. Panasonic understood the value, and that leadership understood the value of taking care of its employees, of its customers, of its communities, of doing things for the greater good. And that company was a leader not only in the industry, but for all of Japan. And to this day, when you see companies that have mission and vision statements, I think a lot of it stems back to the success and that vision of Mr. Matsushita. So as a leader, don't be afraid of these new accountabilities. Embrace them. Because the more of these folks that you help and satisfy, the more you do for them, the better and stronger a leader you'll be. Now, if this webinar had a soundtrack, the music would now turn a little ominous. And I'll tell you why. One of the things, when you talk about who's a leader or what does a leader do, everybody talks about a leader having vision, a vision that everyone will follow. Well, I'll tell you right now, in my opinion, there are two kinds of leaders. There's the leader that believes that that vision comes strictly from within her or within him. And those leaders just try and motivate people around them to do what they, the leader, think is correct. And you can recognize these leaders because they tend to have to lead with a stick or with a carrot. They're either threatening or bribing people to follow their vision. That's one kind of leader. The other kind of leader was like Mr. Matsushita, like Mr. Diamond. They look at the world around them, the environment and the people around them. They're constantly talking to these folks and learning about what's important, what are the insights, what are the core problems, and trying to create a vision that will lead them forward so everybody does better. That's the kind of leader I think you should aspire to be. If you decide that you want to be the first kind of leader because it's easy and, hey, wouldn't it be cool if everybody did what I say? Well, keep in mind that in 2018, 39% of CEOs were thrown out because of ethical lapses, more than for financial performance or board struggle. And I truly believe that these folks had those ethical lapses because they believed that the leadership vision was supposed to come from inside of them instead of from the world around them. I can't imagine that the leadership at Volkswagen said, well, we're going to cheat on these emission standards for the good of mankind. I don't think so. I think people who fool themselves into believing that it's their vision that is the best vision are just doing that. They're fooling themselves. And in this world, in the 21st century, you cannot be that kind of leader for very long without somebody figuring it out. If you're the other kind of leader, then when you express a vision, people aren't going to need sticks or carrots. They're going to recognize in your vision their own ideas of what's right and wrong. And then you are going to get people like the workers on that roof working very, very hard together to create something of tremendous value. So, diverse perspectives, absolutely vital that you have closer connections to your stakeholders. And that's a fancy name for everybody around you that you're creating value for or that you're influencing. Staying current on the technology, the competitive environment, the world situation, the world that they live in, as well as you, is part of it. Because that's how we learn. That's how we create empathy for the people around us. And then empathy allows us to truly listen to our customers. That humility, that self-awareness also allows us to listen to non-customers and to constantly test our own assumptions, to decide whether we've gone astray, whether maybe we're not getting the full picture. Going astray and not getting the full picture is easy to do if you're just depending on your own skills and your own ability. But luckily, we live in this great, phenomenal world where we have all these people around us all the time with diverse perspectives. Maybe they come from different backgrounds culturally, or they have different job functions, or they just have different experiences or points of view. And unlocking the talent of those people to support your weaknesses and to take advantage of their strengths is something that the diverse perspective leader must do if they're truly going to create something great. And don't get confused here. When I say that you take advantage of that diversity around you, I'm not saying, oh, just make sure that everybody in the room is a different color or a different gender or anything else. That's not it. You have to create an environment of inclusion so that no matter who that person is, and every single one of them has value to contribute, trust me, no matter who they are, they have to feel comfortable making that contribution. They have to feel comfortable speaking up and saying, this is what I think, and this is what I see. Let me tell you, I teach innovation and risk at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. It's a phenomenal class. We have a lot of fun with it. And we do different tools and trainings to sort of build on creativity and come up with solutions. And brainstorming is a very popular one. I'm sure most of you have done this. Well, here's something that's not readily obvious. The greatest ideas out of brainstorming sessions, people that have looked at this and studied the numbers, are not the first ideas. You got 10 people in a room and they can all give you 10 different ideas. Don't stop. Take the second and third ideas that build off of somebody else's. I was trying to think of a good example of this, and it's a little bit quirky, but suppose you're in a mechanical engineering meeting and you're considering the construction of a new part, and somehow the cafeteria chef slipped into the meeting. No engineering degree, no experience building machinery, but there he is, he's sitting around, and you're talking about a problem that you're having, and he says, well, maybe we should make that part out of Jell-O. Well, in a closed-off world where we're not looking for that inclusion and that diversity, we might say, what are you doing here? Get out of here, get back to your cafeteria. But in a real world where we're looking to unlock talent, we might say, well, the Jell-O idea probably won't work, but I guess I see that you're talking about a flexible, moldable material to make something. And we've got silicons that'll do that just fine. And you know what? That could probably solve our answer, or our problem. A second level, third level solution, building on the contributions of others, is by far the most powerful and usually the best solution to any problem. So when it comes to diverse perspectives, to be a great leader, to be an effective leader in the world we live in, you've got to understand your environment. You've got to know that your vision has to come from the outside. You're still putting it together. You're still filtering it. You're still trying to understand it. You're the center point, but it's still coming from the outside. And as you progress, as you launch your rocket and your initiative, stay tuned to the outside so that you can course correct and become better. And that way you'll be able to anticipate where you're headed. You'll be able to anticipate the future needs. And you will definitely be much, much better at engaging others to follow your vision, to follow the vision that you've garnished from them. Okay? Self-awareness about your own faults and self-awareness about your own limitations is going to help you do that. It's going to give you the humility you need. Okay, so we've talked about some important things, and I think it can be summed up fairly well by a quote from Peter Drucker, who's a very famous management guru, and he says, management is doing things right, but leadership is doing the right things. A lot of you out there are probably great managers, and maybe some of you have been great managers for a few years in your current position, and maybe you're getting a little frustrated. You're like, how come I'm not getting a promotion? Well, that next level, I guarantee you, has a larger leadership component than what you currently have, and you must demonstrate that leadership to those around you so that they can feel comfortable and inspired to move you up so that you can help others. And what we've talked about today, the data analytics to gather insights, the innovation to turn those insights into useful and creative ideas continuously, and a diverse perspective to make sure that those solutions to those problems are balanced and help everyone around you, that's doing the right things. That's being a great leader. Well, I'm going to open it up now for some questions. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so please go ahead and type some questions in. I have a few that I have collected throughout the webinar. One person said, any thoughts around being innovative in an industry that is heavily regulated and not open to a lot of risk-taking?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I recently worked with a medical equipment company. And in their laboratories where the equipment that they make is used, it's an extremely regulated environment. And I asked one of them, again, asking questions. This is how you learn. I said, so how does any change come about if it's so regulated? And they said, well, we have trials. We do prototypes on the side. We demonstrate. We gather a lot of data, and that's how we make the changes. And I said, okay, so what's the problem? Ask questions. Gather data that reflects the usage pattern and the business drivers around you. If you're working in a lab by yourself all day long in front of a piece of equipment and you're in a heavy regulated industry and your job is to hand somebody off a report, ask the person you're handing the report, could this be easier to read? Is there additional information that you could use? What do you do with this report when I give it to you? Is there something that I can do to make that task easier? You'll be surprised how often what you discover are things that are not regulated. Maybe it's making the font a larger size because you're handing it off to an old guy like me that can't read 10 font. Or maybe it's changing the color of some of the key indicators when they're too high or too low. The point is, you can make a positive change. It starts by asking the questions. And if you're in a heavily regulated industry, that may mean that the change could be slower or requires a larger team. But as long as you are open to that insight, I think you'll discover good solutions.
Okay. Another person wants to know, how do you convince others in your organization that it's not enough to just keep improving on current products? How do I convince my leadership that we need to be more forward-thinking and find solutions for our customers' future needs?
Excellent question. So there isn't a fixed rule, but about 80% of the time, or maybe even 85% of the time, you should be improving your existing product. Look, Kaizen, continuous improvement, those are wonderful things. They apply to your current customer and your current product. And that's where a lot of the current revenue is coming from. However, there's a lot of data out there that shows that, like disruptive innovation, look up disruptive innovation and Clay Christensen, and you'll gather lots of data from his articles and his videos that will convince anybody that you have to be paying attention to the bigger problems. I teach some innovation webinars, and I put it simply like this. You can be productive and efficient, or you can be innovative and creative. We all tend to be productive and efficient, and that means that when we get to work in the morning, we look for the biggest fire, the loudest customer, the biggest boss who's asking for something, and that's the problem we solve. That's what being productive and efficient means. You solve that big problem. But being innovative means you have to solve a core problem. And in order to solve a core problem, in order to get your management to understand that there's a core problem that needs to be solved and isn't being addressed, you need those insights. You need to ask questions. You need to gather evidence. Once you know what the problem is, you have to come up with a solution. And here, if you're being productive and efficient, your solution looks like an improvement. This is what you're seeing every day. But if you're being innovative and creative, your solution is transformative. Uber did not solve the cab problem. Airbnb did not solve a hotel problem. They transformed that problem. They transformed that industry. Once you've identified the core problem, then I think many of you are more than creative enough to think about transformative solutions. And those are the ones you should be pursuing. Again, 10% of your time. One last element here. Once you pursue a solution, if you're being productive and efficient, what does that solution look like? Well, here's a problem I think you're having. That solution looks like you've got a hammer and the whole world's a nail. Hey, I've used this solution before. Hey, your management's telling me that this is the way we've always done it and it's always worked. Okay, so if you're productive and efficient, you use something that's worked before. But quite honestly, it's worked before, but it's not going to continue to work into the future. That's why half of the S&P 500 companies are no longer around. If you're being productive and efficient, you're doing things the way you've always done them. And there are new problems that are being created by change that cannot be solved in the same way. So what does an innovative and creative solution look like? It looks like you are working with people, working with diverse people. You are solving things to solve their problem. You're having empathy for people, and you're solving core problems. The solution looks like something transformative, and the implementation looks like something that your customers and your stakeholders want. You know what? Those S&P 500 companies could not have gone out of business if all their customers and stakeholders liked what they were doing. So whatever solution you come up with, make sure you have that diverse leadership perspective to understand that there's a balance there of people who garnish value from it.
I don't have any other questions. I have several comments. One around the fact how interesting that you can use data to help your customers better understand future needs and therefore open up new business opportunities. So I thought that was an interesting.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now be careful not to use data to beat your customers down until they finally see things your way. Use the data and be honest with yourself. If you can convince yourself, specifically if you don't like the answer, then you'll definitely be able to convince a customer.
Great. I think that's all of our questions. Just a couple things. So as you log out of today's webinar, you will be served up the opportunity to get more information. So if you'd like more information, as well as a link to today's presentation, you can do that when you log out. Also, if you're a student or an alum and you're interested in becoming a Lake Forest Graduate School of Management Ambassador, there is also the opportunity to sign up to get more information about that. And as well as register for upcoming events if you're a prospective student, and all of these events that you see on the screen are in Central Time. We have a virtual open house coming up. We have a webinar on financing your MBA, and then we also have an in-person open house. Or if you would just like to talk to an admissions counselor and just schedule a 15-minute chat, you can do that as well. We will also be making, like I said, the presentation available. So if you have any questions, just make sure that you note that in the survey when you log out, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, which will be sometime in April, and we'll be getting that topic out to you soon. Thank you. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Hello.